Okay, welcome back. So I guess we'll go ahead and get started. It looks like a majority of the class is still on break, but they'll probably join soon. So today's plan is to do chapter 7 and chapter 8. So we're going to try to do 2 chapters today, but it shouldn't be too bad. We should have plenty of time in the 2 hours to do those. And so you didn't have homework over the break, so no econ for a couple weeks, but there will be there's a homework for each chapter. So there's 2 homework assignments this week, but I think they're both just one problem or so. So it's not too long, but there is homework for chapter 7 and for chapter 8. So, but it shouldn't be too bad. Okay, so we learned about production cost and cost curves in chapter 6, and that means that the next step is to look at some different types of markets in chapter 7, chapter 8, and chapter 9. So we're going to talk about essentially 4 different types of markets and spend some time on those today and next time. So let's go ahead and get started, I guess. And so also just I assume everybody saw your midterm grades and the solutions. So let me know if you have any questions about that. But the scores in the midterm were pretty good, so there shouldn't be any issues there. But yeah, all right. So let's start. Okay, if we go to the study guides, and we can open up the chapter 7. Okay, in the chapter 7 examples. Okay, and then the chapter 7 PowerPoint, which is right there. Okay, so we're going to learn about 4 different types of market models, and let's just review those 4 types on slide 2, and then we'll jump into the first type, which is pure competition. So the 4 market models we're going to learn about in these 2 chapters, and the next chapter on next Monday, slide 2 here. Okay, so this chapter is about pure competition, and we'll learn about that. We'll learn about monopolistic competition in chapter 9, and also oligopoly in chapter 9, and we're going to learn about pure monopoly, I believe, in chapter 8. So we're going to cover this one and this one today, and then the next 2 next week in chapter 9. So these are 4 distinct types of markets, and we'll kind of learn the features and assets of each. But we'll start with kind of the basic pure competition. That'll be the first one. And then we'll do the other extreme where there's kind of, so the first one we're going to do is really the firms have no market power. And the other extreme is there's a pure monopoly where there's just one firm that has all the power, and these ones kind of come in between. So we'll cover the 2 extremes today, and then these other 2 next week. Okay, so we'll first start on pure competition, which is for chapter 7. Okay, so pure competition, let's define this type of market on slide 3. Okay, so this type of market, there's a very large number of sellers. There's no limit on the number of firms that can come in and compete in this type of market. We are looking at standardized products, which means that the assumption of this market is that everyone produces the same identical goods. So we're looking at kind of like perfect substitutes. The firms are price takers, which means that I'll illustrate that demand determines the market price in the long run, and the firms that compete either choose how much they want to sell at the market price that demand decides, or they don't. So the firms have no market power over price, and they take the price that's determined in the long run equilibrium by demand, and so they're price takers, and they just choose how much they want to produce, if any. Okay, there's entry and exit, which is easy. So firms can come, firms can go. In this type of market, there's very limited barriers to entry or exit. Okay, and kind of the key feature to define this market is we have a perfectly elastic demand curve for these goods, which means that the demand curve is basically a flat horizontal line. And we'll kind of look at the implications of that, but demand here is perfectly elastic, and that's kind of the key feature of this market. All right, so firms can produce as much as they want, or as little as they want, or not produce at all. And because demand is perfectly elastic, like we learned in the elasticity chapter, it's going to be a straight, flat, horizontal line. So, okay, so those were kind of the characteristics. And the demand curve, we're going to see in the next couple slides, is going to be, again, perfectly elastic, which means it's just flat. So if we look at how the revenue curves look in relation to this type of market, on slides 4 to 5, we can look at the average, total, and marginal revenue for this type of market. Okay, so we'll go through a few more features, then we'll try to think of some definition or some examples of this type of market. So we learned about all the cost curves last time, and you know that revenue for a firm is just price times quantity for a single product good firm. So if you look here, like we said, for this type of market, the demand curve is perfectly elastic, and so here's the demand curve, this green line. So the long run demanders or consumers determine that the price they're willing to pay for this good is 131, and any price above that they won't buy, and any price below it, it's not going to. The firms shouldn't charge that because this is what consumers will pay. So here's your perfectly elastic demand curve. Okay, at 131, and so this green line. So this curve or this graph here shows the situation for just one particular firm in this type of market. So the firm is going to decide how much output to produce at that price. So he or she knows, or the firm knows, that they're going to sell their goods at price 131. They got to decide how much to produce. Okay, so if you look at the revenue curve, total revenue curve, actually these two columns should be flipped. So price is 131 and quantity demanded is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So if you look at why it's always 131, that's because each consecutive unit you sell for 131. So if you sell 131, or so if you sell one unit, you get 131. If you sell 2 units, you get an extra 131. It's because the price is the same. And so therefore, the additional revenue is always 131 because each time you sell one more of this good, you get an extra 131. So the demand curve and the marginal revenue curve are both set at 131 here. And you can see the total revenue curve goes up by 131 every time. So up 131, you sell 2 units, up 131, you sell 3 units, up 131, and so on. So this is your constant total revenue curve, and this is your flat demand curve, which is also your marginal revenue curve, because each additional unit is exactly the same marginal revenue. Okay, so the key here again is this flat, perfectly elastic demand curve. And I guess we probably should have defined the revenue things, but so we know that total revenue from just the basics is the price of the good times the quantity sold, right? So this is an individual firm's revenue is just whatever the market price is times how much they sell. Okay, and we know that, or I think we know that marginal revenue is the change in revenue you get from changing one more unit or selling one more unit. So when you change output by 1 unit plus 1, what's the change in revenue? Okay, so the extra revenue from one more unit. And so because this unique situation is a perfectly elastic demand curve where each additional unit is sold for 131, that means the marginal revenue curve is going to be fixed at 131. Okay, and then the top thing, average revenue, this is revenue per unit. So this is just the total revenue divided by Q, which is equal to the average revenue at that quantity. Okay, so the perfectly elastic demand curve, this green line, kind of sets up this type of model, or this type of market. And so it's important to kind of think about what this might illustrate. So maybe we can think of some examples of what kind of market this might model. So okay, so we got a perfectly elastic demand curve for this type of market. And so can we think of some examples of a good produced under perfect competition? So we kind of set up the assumptions and the characteristics and what the demand curve looks like. And so kind of think of like these are perfect substitutes. And so we're looking at like a homogeneous good or service, which means that each firm, we assume, is selling the exact same thing. So in the long run, the consumers determine they'll pay 131 for this good. And that means that because we're selling perfect substitutes, any price charged above that, the consumers will just buy the cheaper one because it's the same thing. So, and the reason why the price doesn't go below that is because consumers decided they're willing to pay 131, and so it wouldn't be profitable, or there would be no reason for the firm to lower the price. All right, so what kind of examples can we think of any that might fit this type of market? Okay, so this again, this got to be. It really depends on how you define it. So, okay, so as long as you define it as a perfect substitute, I think we kind of went through this exercise in the elasticity chapter with the perfectly elastic demand curve. But I think one of the examples I used was like agricultural goods or farmers market goods. Yeah, cotton could be if you set it up as such. Yeah, and so really you can characterize any agricultural or farming good as a um, purely competitive market, right? As long as you kind of make the assumptions. And so if you assume that cotton is the same from all sellers, then yeah, that would work, because if the consumers of cotton decide they're going to pay a certain, let's just say it's 131 because that's the price here. If they decide that they're going to pay 131, then any firm that tries to sell it for more isn't going to get any sales, because the consumers will go to the seller for the 131 because that's all they're willing to pay. Okay, so the firms can't like overcut the market here, because the consumers know that they're selling perfect substitutes, and because of that, they're going to go to the cheapest supplier, which is going to be the demand curve. Okay, so yeah, cotton would work, or any farmers market produce in which we're defining it as perfect substitutes. CDs. So CDs, you would have to assume that they're the like CDs is a tricky one, because you have to assume that they're the same, right? And so because CDs kind of have, you mean that there's different artists, there's different genres, there's different art. Oh, they were always the same. Well, they were always the same price. Were they always the same price? I don't know. I mean, I sup- I suppose if you they used to, mostly they used to be like $15 or something like that. If you can define them as perfect substitute, sure. So if you can assume that all CDs are the same, the same good, and they all sell for $15, then sure, yeah, that works, as long as. But once you start getting like, sure, another example. All right, so how about okay? I have more examples. Let's think it. Let's try this one. All right, so this is a weird example, but I don't know why I thought of this. But if we think of, if just as for the purpose of an example, if we think of like bulk peanuts, and so if we define those as perfect substitutes, so you go to two stores and they're selling the same exact peanuts, right? In bulk, like if you go to Sprouts, you get the bulk things out of the tub. All right, and so if you assume, yeah, and so if you assume that they're the same, right, and Sprouts sells them the bulk peanuts for, I don't know, 25 cents a pound. I'm not sure what the price is, but and then uh, Whole Foods sells them for $1 a pound. You're going to go to Sprouts because they're cheaper, and it's the same thing. So if price is the only determinant of the good, then consumers are only going to pay what their demand curve says. So the reason why CDs has to be like reclassified is because you have to assume that they're perfect substitutes. And so it's a little tricky, because even though the price was about this, like where you can see the problem there is, like if I know that if you like the brand new CDs were always like $15 or $16, but once you give it some time to see like what's a good CD and what's not, once you go back to the used CDs, you'll see that the hit albums, the used CD is a little bit less, but it's still like $12. But the ones that are crap, like that didn't sell at all, those are like $1. So once you give it some time for the market to like correct itself, I think CDs become a little bit complicated, because the quality depends on the consumers kind of respond to quality, right? All right. Okay, so those are examples. And again, you can make any example you want here, but you have to. It has to be. It has to be a standardized product. So as long as you assume that all the sellers are selling the same exact thing, which is a big assumption, but that's the purpose of this example, then it works here. Okay, you're welcome. So let's go. What's next? Okay, so we define pure competition. Some of the characteristics, most importantly, the perfectly elastic demand curve. We defined average revenue as the revenue at the specific quantity. Total revenue is just price times quantity. And marginal revenue is the change in revenue when you change output by one additional unit. Okay, so let's kind of see how firms make their decisions in the short run. And so remember the short run from chapter 6? Okay, so remember we defined the short run in chapter 6 as the only input that can change is labor. So the firms can the firms can hire additional hours, cut hours, hire workers, fire workers, but the plants are fixed in the short run. So there can be no change in capital and no construction, no entry and exit in the short run. So the only thing that changes in the short run is labor. Okay, so what are the firms going to want to do in the short run period in this type of market? Okay. All right. So we're gonna go through a little process of the profit maximizing decision of a purely competitive firm in the short run. All right. So this is the short run period, and this is a purely competitive firm which takes the prices given and decides how much output the firm wants to produce, if any. Okay. So these are the questions we're going to look at. Okay. In this type of market, all right. Should the firm produce? If so, what amount, and what's the profit or the loss if they do produce? Okay, so there's going to be, I think there's going to be 3 cases that we're going to go through, and so let me list the cases here. All right, so in this type of market, there's basically 3 things that can happen. So number one, the best case for the firm is they produce and they make a profit. Okay, the second case, case 2, is they produce and they take a loss, but it's a minimizing loss in the sense that they cover more than they would if they just shut down and lost the fixed cost. So in this case, they're minimizing the losses. And the third case is producing any amount is unprofitable at all, and so they're just going to shut down. Okay, so there's 3 cases: produce and make a profit, produce and minimize losses, or just shut down completely. Okay, So we'll look at the best case scenario first, where the firm is going to make a profit, and we're gonna look at this. There's a condition we're looking for, and I'll type it here, but we'll talk about it a bunch. Okay, so the profit max condition we're to look for is essentially the firm should choose output where marginal revenue equals marginal cost, and in just short form, that's MR equals MC. So in all these markets we look at, that I'm going to show that that's going to be the situation in which that's the best they can do. Sometimes they make a profit, sometimes they don't, but that's their best case scenario, and we'll kind of see that here. Okay, so when you're doing your homework assignment, that's the condition you're gonna satisfy. Okay, so if you look here, this is a big chart, but column 1 is output. All right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 units. Okay, this is average fixed cost, which is just we learned from chapter 6. Divide the fixed cost by Q. Okay, this is average variable cost. Divide the variable cost. I mean, this is just the variable cost divided by output. Okay, average total cost is the total cost divided by output. Marginal cost is the change in cost when you add one more unit. Okay, so we learned all that stuff from chapter 6, and then 5 and 6 are from this chapter. So marginal revenue is the change in revenue for selling each unit. And remember, because of this unique market, we have the perfectly elastic demand curve, which means that each additional unit gives us the same change. Okay, look here. All right, if you sell one unit, you get 131. You sell another unit, you get an additional 131. You sell another unit, you get another 131. So each time you sell one consecutive unit, the change in marginal revenue is always the same. Okay, that's only for this type of market, but it's important here. Okay, so marginal revenue is always equal to the price, the market price, in this type of market. And then you know that profit, remember from like chapter 2, is just revenue minus cost. Okay, and so you don't have to go through the calculations, but you can see that they did the profit calculation, and the best case scenario is essentially what MR equals MC right here. Okay, and so if you calculate profit at any other option, you're going to get a worst case scenario. So anything below, so here's, it's not exactly equal, but pretty close. MC is 130 and MR is 131. Okay, so anything below, any output below that, 0 through 8, the firm can, let's see, how does this look? Yeah, this is the, okay. So any I'll come back to that, but any output below that, the firm is down here. So that means that revenue is bigger than cost, which means they can make some more revenue. And once they go past that, it's too costly. Yeah, okay. All right. So any output below 9 in this example, you can see how the profit's less, negative 59, negative 8, 53. It goes up, reaches a maximum, and then after the MR equals MC point, you start losing profit. Okay, so the point here is that you want to look for the condition in which MR equals MC for the firm, and choose the output at that identity, which in this case is 9. Okay, and the reason is anything below that is going to give you less revenue, and anything above that is going to give you less revenue. This is kind of the sweet spot, if you can find it for the firm, when MR equals MC, which they should choose to produce. It doesn't mean they're always going to make a profit, but it does mean that that's the best case they can do, unless they shut down. Okay, so it's just, I mean, you don't have to double check, but if you find the point where MR equals MC and you do the profit calculation anywhere below or above that, you're going to get a worse outcome. Okay, so if we were this firm, we would find this point and choose our output of 9 because that's our best profit. Okay, all these profits at outputs below it give us less profit, and then if we keep going beyond it, if we produce 10 or more, we're going to lose profit. Okay, and then graphically, here we go. So chapter 6, we learned about the cost curves. We learned about the marginal cost curve, the average variable cost curve, and the average total cost. Okay. Here, we're introducing revenue. And so this is the demand curve. The gray line here, which is also the marginal revenue curve. So see how for this type of market, the marginal revenue is always 131. And so we're trying to find the case or the condition where MR equals MC. So this is MR, this blue line. This is MC, the blue line. This is MR, the gray line. And so when they're both equal, right there, okay? So the output in which they're both equal is 9. So this is the output we would choose. And again, if you calculate profit anywhere below 9, you're going to get a worse outcome. And if you calculate profit anywhere above 9, you're going to get a worse outcome. Okay, because that's the sweet spot here for this firm. And then, like, geometrically, the way you get the profit is, see how this is price and this is quantity. So revenue is price times quantity, 131 times 9. And then cost is average total cost at 9. So if you look kind of like where I'm circling or squaring, this bigger box, right, is revenue. And this 100 times 9 is cost. What's left over is profit. So if you take this big box, subtract this box of cost, what you get left is the green area, which is the profit. So revenue minus cost is profit. Do we see that? What I'm trying to show here, with just kind of on the graph? Okay, so yeah, it's just, you probably did something like this in geometry, but that's kind of what we're doing. So basically, like a big rectangle minus a small rectangle, this is the leftover rectangle. All right, so the green leftover rectangle is what this firm gets in profit. Okay, and the point is that if you try to do that calculation anywhere below MR equals MC or above, that green profit rectangle is going to be less. So this is the best case the firm can do. Turns out they're making a nice profit, but you want to find MR equals MC right there, choose 9, and then this is the firm's profit. Okay, so that was case 1. Remember, produce and make a profit. Case 2 is we're going to produce and minimize losses. Okay, let's see what's going on. So the condition here, I wrote it on the study guide too, is that basically, okay, so we talked about the MR equals MC rule here, right? So they want to do that. So basically, if we'll look on the graph, and if price, the market price, is bigger than the minimum of the average variable cost, the firm's going to produce at this condition. If the market price is less than the minimum of the average variable cost, they're going to shut down. And so we'll see in this case, they're going to shut down because losing the fixed cost is the best case because it's not profitable for that firm to produce. Okay, so if the market price of this good is bigger than that firm's average variable cost at that quantity, they're going to go ahead and produce. If it's not, if price is too low, they can't make enough revenue, they're going to shut down. And then if they produce, they're going to do this condition and choose the output at that identity. Okay. So we've determined. So this firm is checked, and I guess first they're going to find out when MR equals MC, and then find if that's a loss minimizing or a profit maximizing spot for them, or if they should shut down. So if we look here, you'll see when you look at the costs. So again, here's output, average cost, average variable cost, average total cost, marginal cost, marginal revenue, which is always, in this case, 81. Okay, this is a lower market price for this firm, but marginal revenue in pure competition or perfect competition is always the same. But look at the profit calculation. So remember, profit or loss is always revenue minus cost. And so here we go, 100, 109, 108, 107. These are all bad, but the best case is right there, right? When MR equals MC. So if they produce, whatever they do, this firm's taking a loss. But if they can find their best case scenario, that's right here, where MR equals MC. So see, anywhere below that, the profit's worse, or the loss is worse. Anywhere above that, the losses gets more costly. So if they were to shut down, they would lose 100. If they produce, they only lose 64. So it's not ideal, but this is the best case scenario for this firm, in which they're going to minimize their losses by producing. So they'll cover some of their costs, not all of them, but it's better than just losing the whole fixed cost. So it'll make sense once you see the loss minimization of 64 is better than just shutting down and losing 100. All right, so again, this firm would look for MR equals MC produced there, and this would be their loss, but it's better than just shutting down. So if you look at the graph, same thing. The only difference is the price is lower for this good. So anytime the price goes down, that's bad for the firm because that hits their revenue. So where does MR equal MC? If you look at, here's MC, here's MR, and then right there is where they're equal. So we would choose 6 as an output. Okay, that's our best case scenario. But basically, here's the revenue, price times quantity, then here's the cost, 100 times 6. So it turns out that revenue minus cost is in the red, which means that this loss, this red area, the leftover is negative. So this minus this is this, but that's a loss of 64. Okay, so same steps, same graphical analysis. The only difference is, unfortunately, cost is higher than revenue. All right. Third case is the firm is not going to do anything. They're going to shut down. So, and again, this is because the market price that's been determined by demand is too low for this individual firm to produce. Now, it doesn't mean other firms can't do it at a least costly option, but for this firm, these are their cost curves. This is the market price. It's not going to work out for them. So to see why, this is output. Here's the costs, marginal cost curve. Okay, for this firm, demand is set at a price of 71, so that's their marginal revenue. Okay, now start going through and looking at what their revenue, their profit or losses. So if they produce 1, negative 19, negative 128, negative 127, negative 115, all these situations are bad, but the best case for this firm is they lost 100. That's unfortunate, but if they produce any, it's not profitable enough given their cost situation, and they're just going to want to shut down. And the reason why they're going to shut down is because the loss of not producing anything is better than losing any of these situations of producing something. So see how all producing 1 through 10 is worse than 100? And so for this firm, the best case is just to lose the 100. All right, and that's all graphically because the price is below the minimum of the average total cost or the average variable cost. So look at the profit maximizing firm. Price is way above average variable cost at the key point 9. This one, price is above the average variable cost, but they're going to take a loss. But anyway, as long as the price is above that, it's a produced scenario. But in this third one, see how the price is below, right? It's below the here's MR equals MC. Actually, here's MR equals MC. Sorry, and at that best case scenario, the average total cost curve is above that, which means that their costs are too high. So the revenue they get at any option, let alone their best case, is going to be worse than just shutting out. So the best thing here to do is just to lose the short run fixed cost of 100 and shut down. So those are the kind of the three cases where first you want to just this kind of summarizes it here. So look for this situation. All right, so look where MR equals MC, and if at that situation the market price is above the minimum of the average variable cost, you're going to go ahead and produce. Okay, and you're going to choose Q star here and either make a profit or minimize losses. If you find this situation and the price is below the minimum point of the average variable cost, it's not going to work out. You don't want to shut down. So once you find this, for the firm, check to see where the price is. If the price is high enough, produce. If the price is too low, it's too costly for you as a firm, and you're going to want to shut down. Right? Okay, so that we went through a lot of scenarios there. Questions on what I just tried to explain? Do we see how it kind of works for what the firm is going to do here? Okay. All right. So do we go through all these slides, 6 to 13? We did. And slide 16, what was that? Oh yeah, just a summary. So here we go, just one more time. Should the firm produce? So the answer is yes, if price is equal to or greater than minimum average variable cost. So that means the firm is profitable or losses are less than its fixed costs, right? Like we showed. How much should the firm produce? Always where MR equals MC. Okay, profit's going to be maximized or loss is going to be minimized. And will they get a profit if they produce? Yes, if the price is above average total costs, and no if the price is below it. Okay, so this is kind of a nice summary of what we just went through there. All right. Okay, let's look at the short run supply curve, slide 15. Okay, so we just went through a bunch of examples, and remember the turning point or the cutoff point is this is the key. So where is price bigger than, less than, or equal to the minimum of the average variable cost curve? Okay, so see these different prices, P1, P2, P3, P4. If the price is high enough, the firm is always going to produce. But if the price gets too low, below the average total cost curve, they're not going to produce. So see how this is the marginal cost curve that we talked about, and the marginal cost curve is the firm's supply curve if they're going to supply. So they're not going to supply anywhere below the shutdown point, but they will supply anywhere above it. So if this is their marginal cost curve and the price is anything above that minimum shutdown point, then they're going to produce, all right, they're going to supply. So if they're not going to shut down, they're going to supply, and this is their supply curve. But if the price gets below this, they're going to shut down. So this part of the curve, the dotted part, is not the supply curve because they're not going to supply. So once they start supplying, then that point on the marginal cost curve is the supply curve. So essentially, graphically, the short run supply curve is the marginal cost curve above the shutdown point. So anywhere above this point, the marginal cost curve becomes the supply curve because they will supply anywhere above that point, and they will not supply below that point. It's shutting down if the price is too low. Okay. Okay, what about a long run scenario? So in the long run, firms can exit, firms can enter, they can change their plan side, they can change anything in the long run. So what's going to happen is this, because of the limited market power of these firms and because they're price takers, basically the price is set by demand. In the long run, consumers are going to determine the price that kind of neutralizes any profits. So in this type of market, firms can make profits or take losses in the short run, but in the long run, we kind of assume that there's no economic profits. So if you look at what I'm talking about here, slides 18 to 22. Okay. All right. So the whole analysis we just went through was situations for one individual firm, a single firm. So would the single firm produce and make a profit? Would the single firm produce and minimize losses, or would the single firm shut down? So this panel is for the single firm. This panel is for the market as a whole or for the industry. So for the single firm, they're a price taker at that horizontal demand curve. But in the long run, this is the supply curve. It can change. So in the long run, the demand can go up or down, and supply will respond accordingly. But so see how basically we're showing a situation where this firm is making short run profits, right? And that's because demand is higher than the break even point here. So things can change, but in the long run, we kind of assume that everything works out and none of the firms make a profit. So some leave, some enter, but everything gets down to zero. But in the short run, they can make a profit or take a loss. Okay, so see how the industry supply and demand determine the price, and then this is basically the short run analysis. So in the long run, the price can change, but in the short run, this is the price the firm is facing, and it's not going to change in the short run. Okay, so you see how supply and demand determine 131, all right, and that's the firm's short run demand curve. Okay, so the demand curve could perfectly elastic demand curve could change for the firm, but that's going to happen in the long run when demand goes up or down. Okay, so because of the type of the market, there's easy entry and exit, and so the only long run adjustments we consider are entry and exit. So all the firms we assume have the same costs. Yeah, and so let's illustrate how this kind of determines an individual firm's profits or loss in the short run. So we'll kind of show that in the long run, entry is going to eliminate profits. So if there's a profit opportunity in the short run, firms enter in the long run, supply increases and prices fall. And I'll show you the graph. But if it's the other situation where there's losses being made, if firms are making losses, in the long run they're going to leave, supply is going to decrease and the price is going to go up. So look here at the relationship between a single firm and industry. So all right, so let's start with, so if you go over to panel B, industry, you can see that D1 and S1 are the original demand curves. And so this is the long run equilibrium. All right, so at 150, price of 100, outputs 50. So this is S1 and D1 determine that no long run firm is making a profit. But then see what happened. Whatever this good was, there was an increase in demand. Okay, and in the short run, firms can make a profit. Right, so demand goes up, that pushes the price up, and see how all the firms or any firm facing this type of structure, the price is above their break-even point, and they're going to make a profit. But then in the long run, other firms will see that these firms are making profits, and they'll enter. So here's the increase in demand, which pushes the price up. But then firms come in and push the price down, saying, we'll sell it to you for cheaper until it gets back to this point. So this is the short run increase in demand, where firms make a profit in the short run, but in the long run, firms come in and push the price back down, which means this is the long run equilibrium. So in this type of market, the firms made a profit in the short run, but in the long run, no one made a profit. Okay, in the long run, what happened is just more. See, the only change is the price is the same from this point to this point, but what happened is there's a lot more quantity. So supply went up and demand went up. All right, and then here's the other situation. So this is the situation where demand goes down in the short run. So we're starting here at 50 and 100, S1 and D1. But in the short run, the demand for this good or service goes down. Boom, this way, so to D3. What that does is it pushes the price down in the short run. So now this type of firm is taking a loss in the short run. Okay, see, okay, we go from here, demand goes down, they're saying they'll pay less, and these firms start making losses. Okay, so in the long run, the firms on the margin are like, we're leaving this market because we're taking a loss, and all these firms leave. Okay, so because demand went down, that caused firms to take a short run losses, like the firms that had this type of structure, and then in the long run, firms leave, they exit, and the resulting long run equilibrium is back to the price of 50, but we have a quantity of less. It went from 100,000 to 90,000. So this kind of shows the relationship between industry and one firm, and how if there's a short run boost in demand, firms can make a profit, right? So they can take advantage of that situation, but in the long run, firms will figure it out. And if there's a short run increase in demand, that's bad for firms. They're going to take a loss. In the long run, those firms that can't make it at all are going to leave, and it'll go back to the long run equilibrium. Okay. Okay, so in the long run, entry eliminates profits for those firms that make short run profits. Okay, so they get profits in the short run, but in the long run, other firms come in and they push the price back down. And then for that other situation, exit eliminates losses in the long run. Okay, so no matter what happens in the short run, in the long run, firms figure it out and either come in to profitable firms or profitable markets, or leave unprofitable markets and kind of neutralize things in the long run. Okay, so this shows us essentially that what we're saying is that the long run equilibrium of a firm is that break-even point when, remember, firms were going to make a profit if the price was bigger than the minimum average total cost. So in the long run, these conditions are going to hold. All right, if you look at slide 26. Okay, so that's going to be the point where, so above this point, firms make a profit. Below this point, they minimize losses. So that means that the break-even point in the long run is just this, because firms come in or leave to kind of get here. And this is also the point where price equals marginal cost. or marginal revenue equals marginal cost, same thing. So if you look at the graph, okay, so we just said that in, where's the first one? This one. Okay, so we showed a profit opportunity in the short run for the firm, but in the long run, it gets back to this. So in the long run, we just said that price is going to be, or we said that, price equals the minimum of the average total cost, and price equals marginal cost. So for this one, here we go. There was profit in the short run, but in the long run, we're back here where price equals the minimum of the average total cost, the bottom point of this cost curve, and price equals marginal cost. Okay, so both those conditions hold there, because if, again, if the price goes up, then firms will make a profit in the short run, but then they'll push it back down by entering. If the price goes down, firms will take a loss in the short run, but they'll leave and the price will get pushed back up. So this is the long run equilibrium. We're assuming that kind of in the long run, everything graduates to this point where the price just equals that minimum point of the average total cost curve, right? And the same holds for the loss scenario. All right, so in the short run, you can take losses, but in the long run, we're back to that break-even point where price just equals the minimum point of that average total cost curve. Right? Anywhere above that, you'd make a profit. Anywhere below that, you'd minimize losses. And if the price gets too low, you shut down. Okay. All right. Okay. Questions on this, on the log run analysis? Any questions on how, like, we showed how you can make a profit in the short run if demand goes up, but in the long run it goes back to this point, or if it's a less desirable market in the short run, you can take a loss, but it goes back to this point. All right, so short run profits, short run losses, but in the long run we're back to this break-even point, and that's the same point here. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so there's a couple optional videos you can look at for perfect competition, or pure competition, same thing. And another quick one on how the short run supply curve is graphically derived. You can look at those videos if you want. All right, let's look at a few examples. Okay, so let's use the demand schedule below to determine total revenue and marginal revenue for each of the possible level of sales. All right, so we got the price of the good is $2. These are different quantities, and all we got to do is calculate revenue, which is price times quantity, and marginal revenue, which is the change from selling each additional unit of demand. So I put it down here. The price is always 2 for this good. Okay, the quantities are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and revenue is just price times quantity. So 2 times 0 is 0, 2 times 1 is 2, so on. And you can see that each time we sell an additional unit, the change in revenue is always 2. Okay, so the marginal revenue for this firm is always 2. All right, so part A, what can you conclude about the structure of the industry in which this firm is operating? And this is pure competition. And we know this because, well, it's the chapter, but price equals demand. which equals marginal revenue, which would mean we have a perfectly elastic demand curve. So if you see that the price is fixed and the marginal revenue is fixed at that price, that's got to mean that you're in a perfectly elastic or perfectly competitive scenario. Okay, and if you graph the demand, total revenue, and marginal revenue curves for this firm, you get that these are the prices and these are the outputs or quantities. Your total revenue curve goes up by 2 every time. So plus 2, plus 2. Right, so this is a positive slope of 2. And the marginal revenue curve and the demand curve are the same they're perfectly elastic at 2. So the price is 2, that's demand, and each additional unit of revenue gives you an extra 2. Okay, so consumers will only pay $2 for this good, which means that you can choose how much you want to sell, but each unit you sell gives you an additional 2. All right, and there's your perfectly elastic demand curve, which is indicates that you're in a pure competition scenario. Okay, so if you wanted to see the Excel file for this, you don't have to do this, but I posted it under the study guides where I just showed how I got the total revenue, the marginal revenue, and just making a little graph. Okay, so that's how I got that stuff. Okay, number 2. Okay, the cost function for a firm is total cost equals 25 plus 5q squared, with a marginal cost function of MC equals 10q. All right, so number 2, this is your homework question is going to be like this style, so just follow the same kind of process. So part A, if the firm sells output in a perfectly competitive market and other firms in the industry sell output at a price of 100, what price should the manager of this firm put on the product? And this is kind of a trick question because if it's a perfectly competitive firm and all the other firms are charging 100, remember this is a price-taking scenario, so if the price is set at 100, they have to charge 100. Okay, so B, what level of output should the firm produce to maximize profit? So remember the condition we're to look for is MR equals MC. Okay, but for a perfectly competitive firm, we know that the marginal revenue is always equal to the price, right? So each additional unit gives you the same marginal revenue of the price. So if the price is set at 100, that means that each additional unit gives you 100, which means that the change in revenue is always 100. So if you know that the price equals marginal revenue in a perfectly competitive firm, just plug it in for that. So MR equals MC, but here P equals MR, so that means that price equals MC. Okay, so basically this is the general identity. This is the situation for perfect competition. All right, then plug in the price of 100 and plug in your marginal cost function that was given right here, 10q. Okay, so you got 100 equals 10q. Just solve for q divided by 10, which means that 100 divided by 10 is 10. So this firm should choose its output of 10 to maximize profits. Okay, how much profit will be earned? That's just, so remember, profit's just total revenue minus total cost. Total revenue is the price of the good times how much they sell, right? And then cost is, here's the cost structure. So here's the total revenue, and then subtract the cost. Okay, and then plug in your price of 100 times your quantity of 10, and then minus, okay, so make sure you subtract all the costs. So minus the fixed cost of 25, and then minus 5 times, plug in your Q there, minus 5 times 10 squared. Okay, and that gives us 1,000 minus 25 minus 500, which gives this firm a profit of 475. Okay, so for this type of question, right, the price is going to be given. So make sure you just, the firm's a price taker. Then find the point where MR equals MC, which in this, for a perfectly competitive firm, that's going to be where P equals MC, and solve for Q. And then just find your profit, which is total revenue minus total cost, after you find the price and quantity. Okay. Questions on this type of problem? Number 2 here. Okay. Okay. Perfect. So let me pull up the homework assignment for chapter 7, and we have another chapter to do. So we're about halfway done, or a little more than halfway done. Okay. Homework assignments, chapter 7. All right. So for the homework assignment for chapter 7, you got 2 questions that kind of look like what we just did. All right. So number 1 is you get a cost function, you get a marginal cost, and you're going to find out the price. You're going to set MR equal to MC and find profits, or find the output that's going to maximize profits, and then calculate profits, and then do that again for number 2. Okay, you got a total cost function, you got a marginal cost function, find price, put MR equal to MC and find Q, and then calculate profits. All right, so just if you use the one we just did as an example, this one should be pretty clear. Okay, so let me know if you have any questions on this one, but this one's for chapter 7. And that goes there, okay, by next Monday. All right. So let's do chapter 8. Okay, so I'm going to open up the study guide and the Excel file for chapter 8. All right, and then we can open up the PowerPoint for chapter 8 as well. Okay. All right, so chapter 8 is about a different type of market, which is monopoly. So this is like the complete opposite of the extreme compared to peer competition. So this is where we're going to have just one firm, and they have the whole market. So pure monopoly. All right, let's look at slides 2 to 4 and then slide 9. Okay, so this is a monopoly, a pure monopoly. So this type of market, there's only one seller. So there's a single seller. All right, that's the definition of a monopoly. There's no close substitutes of this type of product. So that means that for these customers, they only buy from this one supplier, which is the monopolist. Okay, so the opposite of the purely competitive firm, this firm is a price maker. They can charge whatever price they want under monopoly. And there's, for whatever reason, there's blocked entry, and it's very difficult, if not impossible, for other firms to come into this market because there's only one firm, and there's not much, there's no pricing competition, right? Because they can charge whatever price they want. Okay, so one seller, and they're a price maker, and these are some typical examples of monopolies that you're probably familiar with. Is that most public utility companies are monopolies. So your gas company, your electric company, water company, your trash company, and the reason they're monopolies is because when you get your electrical service, or gas service, or water service, or trash service, you only have one option to go through. They're the only provider. So there's not, you can't really shop around for these types of services, and so therefore, because you can only buy from one firm, they own the whole market and they're a monopoly. Okay, so like the SoCal Gas Company is a monopoly. Edison, and then often the local city or whatever your water provider is, there's probably only one option for that. So most public utilities are monopolies because the consumer can't really shop around. Okay. Okay, so there are barriers to entry for a monopolist because there's some conditions or conditions that prevent other firms from coming into this market. Could be that there's just economies of scale. This firm can do it the best, and they can do it cheaper than any other firms. There could be legal barriers. A lot of times you'll get like a patent for some kind of a new drug or like a new pharmaceutical, and you'll have the monopoly rights to sell that patented drug for until the monopoly rights run out. You might just have you might have all the resource, maybe you have all the oil or gasoline in the area, and therefore you can sell it all because you have it all, or some kind of pricing scenario. Okay, so the point is that there's one firm here selling the good or service, making it a monopoly, and there's other barriers that prevent other firms from coming into this market and competing with the monopolists. And there's different barriers, but it can be any of these things or any number of other things. And most of these monopolies you're familiar with are public utilities, even though I think Edison is a private company. But a lot of times they for whatever reason they own the rights to sell that good or service in the area. So most likely your gas company, if it's SoCal Gas, they have the exclusive right to sell gas to their customers in that region. And most likely, if you have Edison, they have the rights, protected rights to sell to all their customers in the region. So these monopolies are territorial, but for the customers that get provided by these companies, they don't have a choice. They got to buy or they don't, right? So because of that, they're monopolies. Okay, so the characteristics where we have there's one seller, all right, no substitutes, and there's blocked entry, and the monopolist is a price maker. All right, and the best example I think are the public utilities. Okay, water, trash, electric, and let's look at what the demand and MR curves look like for this type of firm. Okay, so you can see the complete contrast here. We do not have a perfectly elastic demand curve. We have a normal downward sloping demand curve that we're probably more familiar with. So this green line is the monopolist demand curve, which means that when the price goes down, they get more customers, right? So just think of a normal demand curve, and because this is the only seller, this is the only firm providing this good or service, they are the industry. So the industry demand, the market demand, and the monopolist, it's all the same thing. So this is the market, this is the monopolist, this is the industry. So just think of this, everything is this demand curve. Okay, so you're probably familiar with just the law of demand. When the price goes down, demand goes up, and vice versa. So the monopolist is facing a normal downward sloping demand curve, and also because they don't have a constant demand curve, every time they charge a lower price, they get a little bit less marginal revenue because the price is lower, right? So if they drop the price, demand goes up, but the additional revenue from a lower price has to be lower because the price is lower, right? Okay. So compared to the last market, downward sloping demand curve, downward sloping marginal revenue curve, and this is probably more typical of what you're used to seeing. So given these facets and what this type of market is, how is the monopolist going to make a decision for its output quantity and price? Let's look at that. Okay, so how does a monopolist choose its output and price to maximize profit? That's the next thing we're going to look at in slides 9 to 10. All right, so what you'll note here is that we're going to stick with the same rule for all these markets, including this one. So we're first going to start with the point in which the monopolist MR curve equals the MC curve, because that's the best they can do. Okay, so if you look at slides 9 and 10, all right, so it's the same analysis, except the only difference is between this versus the last peer competition market is the demand curve is not flat, it's downward sloping, right? And that's because when the monopolist lowers the price, demand goes up and vice versa, right? So price is not set by consumers, price is set by the monopolist. Okay, so you can see that consumers will, so monopolists can raise prices, but what we'll see is that it's not a good idea just to raise price to the highest level possible, because doing that, they're gonna get a lot for that customer, but they're gonna lose too many customers. So they want to find the point in which they should choose their output and maximize profit. And so see, that's the same scenario where here's our marginal cost curve, here's our gray MR curve, and we're still looking for the point at which those two are equal. So even though this is downward sloping, it's the same situation, right? So this is where MR equals MC at a quantity of 5. And if you calculate profit, if you plug in any quantity and calculate profit less than 5, you'll get less profit. If you plug in any quantity bigger than 5, you'll get less profit. The best case is when MR equals MC for this monopolist, which here is a quantity of 5. So see, here's the blue MC curve. Here's the gray MR curve. There's where it hits. There's where they cross. So when they cross, that's when we're going to choose our quantity, which is 5. Okay, now the difference is we get to choose our price as a monopolist, and what they're going to do, if they can do this, is they're going to find their best quantity, and they're going to find 5, and they're going to go look at 5 and go to the demand curve at 5 and charge the price that the market would pay at a Q of 5. So see that? Here's the MR equals MC. There's the 5, and then go up at 5, go up to the demand curve and charge this price. Looks like 122. So that's what the monopolist is going to want to do to maximize profit. So find this point, set the quantity at that, and then find the price on the demand curve at which the consumers would pay at a Q of 5. All right, see that? So it's one extra step compared to the last market, because the monopolist gets to choose its price where the pure competition firm didn't. All right, and you'll see that if you try calculating profit at any other scenario where this is not the quantity and this is not the price, you're going to get a worse outcome. So you can try it. You can try anything else. You can try price is 150. You can try quantity is 6. You can try quantity is 4. You can try price is 100. None of them will give you the best case except for this one. All right. So if the monopolist can find that, that's what they're going to want to do. So here it is. Q is 5. Go up to demand, and price is 122. And again, geometrically, here's price times quantity. Here's revenue. Here's cost. Okay, here's the average total cost at 5. So revenue minus cost, and the leftover is profit. All right, so 125 times 5 minus 500 gives us the leftover. And really, the monopolist is always going to make a profit. If they weren't, then they wouldn't be the only provider of the good or service. Okay. All right. Everyone good on this so far? Kind of how we do this in comparison to the last market? Any questions on the profit maximizing decisions of the monopolist? Okay. All right, so let's look at price discrimination. So slides 14 to 16. Okay, so what price discrimination is this is the act of charging different buyers different prices, and these are price differences they charge are not based on cost, but based on the fact that the monopolist or whatever firm can segregate the market and find what different markets will pay and charge them different prices. So what they want to do is, if they can do it, they got to have some monopoly power. They got to be able to segregate the market, and they have to eliminate resale. So there's a whole bunch of examples here. And some of these might be a little bit different given the current economic climate, but we'll see what we can do here. So business travel, and the idea of this, so at least the way, I don't even know what prices look like anymore for airlines, but before the pandemic, um, prices were based on time, right? And so if you plan ahead, you can get a trip for much lower costs. But if you have a very important deadline, or let's say you have a business meeting, it just came up, and you have to get a ticket tomorrow, you can get a ticket if there is one, but you got to pay more. So if you wait to the last minute, or you wait too long, the price for the same ticket's going to go up, and the airlines know that they could charge higher prices if there's not much time left, and they'll raise the price. But if you plan ahead, you can get a much cheaper price. So it's the same ticket, same airline, but time really determines the factor there. Okay, now I don't know if you can do that anymore. I don't know if you can. I mean, back in the days, you could just go to the airlines and get a ticket. Might not be the case anymore. I don't know. Okay, utilities. You can get specific prices based on what type of. So if you're like under a certain income level, you can get a lower rate um, for the same product. If you have like some kind of like solar panel or some efficiency standard thing, or like a battery, you can probably get a lower rate. So there's different. If you check different boxes, you can get the same service for a lower rate. Okay, the movie theaters, they can charge different prices to different customers. And what do movie theaters, or what do they used to do? I don't know what they do anymore, but so what are some different groups they would charge different prices for theaters? So before the pandemic, who got lower prices to go to the movies? Yeah, right, senior discounts. And I think they had like student discounts. And if you go early in the day, right? Yeah, right, military discounts. Yeah, and so if you fit a certain criteria, you get a discount, and you're seeing the same movie, right? You get the same seats, but you get a lower price given your uh, qualification. Okay, and also like if you went to a matinee early in the afternoon, there's less demand for that, so they could charge a lower price. Okay, golf courses. I think I'm not much of a golfer, but I think you get lower rates if you go later in the day, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know much about. I don't know what the railroad thing is. But anyway, we get the idea. So uh, if if the firm can, so the key here is the firm is selling the same good or service at different prices to different groups. Now, if we start looking at, like, if you look at first class versus economy, that's a whole different service, and that doesn't count. So it has to be the same good or service sold at different prices. If it's not the same service, then it's not the same. It doesn't qualify. So yeah. Okay, so this is a nice little example of how if the firm was able to price discriminate, how that would increase their profit. So if they just sold to one firm, they'd get one profit calculation at that price. But if they can determine that different groups have different demand curves, essentially, then they can get more revenue by charging different prices to different groups and adding the revenue together. So for this example, I'm not sure what it is, but I like to use like Microsoft Office. Okay, and so it's very likely that businesses have a higher willingness to pay for Office, and students are willing to pay much less. And so because of that, this is what like Microsoft would do. They're going to charge a higher price to businesses and they're going to give them some more features, and they'll have some extra security, or maybe some, I don't know, some extra security keys, stuff like that. But the price for business Office is going to be a lot more, right? And the businesses are going to pay it because they have a high demand for that good. Now, the student version of Microsoft Office is probably going to be a little less advanced. You might not have all the features, but a lot of students don't care. They just want to have it and have the basic features. So the point is that in most cases, businesses are willing to pay a lot more for Office with the extra features, and students just want the basic features, and they're willing to pay a lot less. They're not going to pay whatever, like $1,000 for Office. They're going to pay the $100. Or in many cases, like Laverne, it's included, right? So you get your tuition covers the subscription to Office. Okay. All right, so we got some optional videos if you want to look at those. So there's one on monopolies and anti-competitive markets. There's a couple on monopolies. So if you get a chance, you can look at those videos. Okay, so let's look at some examples. So number one, let's use the following demand schedule for a pure monopolist to calculate total revenue at each quantity, and let's plot the demand curve and the MR curve. So these are the prices, this is the demand curve, and I put those down here. So when the price goes up, demand goes down. Okay, and you know that total revenue is just price times quantity, right? This times this times this. And marginal revenue is the change in revenue when you go from different units. So when you go from 0 to 1, output, the change in revenue is 650. When you go from 1 to 2, the change in revenue is 550. So you got to look at the marginal revenue here is not just the same like the peer competition. Okay, and if you were to plot that, you would see that the demand curve is downward sloping. When the price goes down, demand goes up. And the MR curve is below it, and the MR curve goes down every time the price goes down, because when the price is lower, the additional units sold is giving you less revenue. Okay, and so this Excel file just shows how I got that, where total revenue is just the price of the good times the quantity. Okay, marginal revenue is just the change in revenue from selling one more unit at each level. Okay, and if you wanted to plot those, you'd see something like we saw on the graph, where you got your downward sloping demand curve, your downward sloping MR curve, and yeah. Okay. All right, so number 2 is going to be, there's going to be a homework question like this. So it's doing the profit maximizing choices for the monopolist. So it's a nice way to see how it's a little bit different than the purely competitive firm. Okay, because this firm is not a price taker. They get to choose their price, but they want to choose a price that gives them the highest revenue if they can do that. All right, so number 2, only one firm produces and sells unicorn frappuccinos in the country of Starbucks. International trade is prohibited, and the following equations describe the monopolist's demand, marginal revenue, total cost, and marginal cost curves. Okay, so here's our demand curve. Price equals 20 minus 2Q, right? Here's our marginal revenue curve, 20 minus 4Q. Here's our total cost curve. So notice that we have a few components. 6 is the fixed cost, And then 2q plus q squared is the variable cost. And marginal cost is 2 plus 2q. So you're going to use these equations, which will be given, to find quantity and price and revenue for this monopolist. All right, so part A, what is the market quantity of unicorn frappuccino that this monopolist wants to charge? So start with the condition, MR equals MC, that's the best they can do, right? And then just plug in your MR curve, 20 minus 4Q, plug in your MC curve, given of 2 plus 2Q, so you get that equals that. And then you want to find the Q that sets these equal. So if you add 4Q to both sides, and if you subtract 2 from both sides, you get 6Q equals 18. If you divide by 6, you get Q star is 3. Okay, so this monopolist is going to set the output of 3. Now B, what price should the monopolist charge? So once you get the output, you want to go to the demand curve, plug in the Q star, and then find the price the consumers would pay at that quantity. All right, so we got the Q. We're going to plug that in right there. Okay, so here's our demand curve, which is given 20 minus 2Q, and P equals 20 minus 2. Plug in the Q of 3. All right, so this goes right there. All right, and that gives us a price of 20 minus 6, which is a price of 14. All right, and then what would be the monopolist profit? So same thing, profit's total revenue minus total cost. Total revenue is always price times quantity. And then subtract the cost curve, which is given. So we're going to pay those costs at this quantity. So make sure this whole cost curve gets subtracted for total cost. Okay, plug in your price of 14, your quantity of 3. And again, a common mistake here is you don't distribute the minus sign, so make sure all these items have to be subtracted because they're costs. We have to pay those. So minus 6, minus 2q, minus q squared. And then plug in the q of 3. So that goes there, and that goes there. So that gives us 42, minus 6, minus 6, minus 9, 42 minus 21, and that gives us a profit of this monopolist of $21. Okay, so for this type of question, make sure you just kind of stick to the steps where you want to, part A, you're going to set MR equals MC and find Q star, all right? Part B, you're going to take the Q star you got and plug that into the demand curve and find the price the consumers would pay at that quantity, all right? That's step 2. And then step 3 is just calculate profit, which is total revenue minus total cost. Total revenue is always price times quantity. And then you're going to be given a cost curve. So make sure you subtract the cost curve, which for this case is right there. Okay, so kind of one more step than the previous one, but same kind of process. The only difference is we choose the price in step 2. All right, so do we see what the idea here? Any questions on what to do for this type of question? Okay. All right, let's pull up the homework assignment for chapter. What chapter is this? Chapter 8. Okay, so here's one question doing the profit maximizing exercise for monopolist. All right, this is for chapter 8. This is due next Monday as well. So you got here a demand curve, MR curve, a total cost curve, and a marginal cost curve. Okay, so use those curves to do this question. So you're going to find part A, you're going to set MR equal to MC and find Q. Part B, you're going to plug in Q that you got into the demand curve and find price. And then you're going to calculate profit, which is revenue minus cost. All right, so follow the same steps we just did in that previous one. And I think, yeah. All right, so everyone knows what to do for this one? Yeah? Okay. All right. Okay, so remember that, so they're not too long, but just note that you have 2 homework assignments. Both of them are due next Monday, just like I think on the syllabus. So you have the chapter 7 homework and the chapter 8 homework we just brought up. So make sure you do both of those and post those here and here by next Monday. So it shouldn't take too long, but just note that there's two separate assignments you got to post for next week. And so both of those, are we up to date? Is next Monday the 29th? I think that's accurate. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, we're all right. We're right on track on the syllabus. So yeah, just like the syllabus says, the chapter 7 homework and the chapter 8 homework both due next Monday, March 29th. And then for the topic for next week is we're going to cover the other 2 types of markets, which are monopolistic competition and oligopoly, both in chapter 9. So chapter 9 is kind of a long chapter, but we're only going to do one chapter, so we'll do that next week, and we'll finish the 4 types of markets. Okay, so chapter 7 homework due next week, chapter 8 homework due next week, and if you're reading ahead, we're going to cover chapter 9 in next week's meeting. And I think, okay, I think that's what I want to cover for today. We did a pretty good job of both chapters, and so let me know if you have any questions on those homework assignments. But I think that's it. So thank you for joining, and have a good week. And I'll see you next Monday, same time.
Thanks, Professor.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.